You'll need 4 chicken leg quarters or 8 pieces of chicken. You can also break down a whole fryer. However, you'll need to remove the 2 chicken breasts from the oven sooner than the rest of the chicken to be sure that they don't dry out. You'll need 1 egg, about 1/4 cup of milk, as well as 1/4 cup of olive oil. You basically need equal parts egg, milk, and oil. You'll need about 1½ cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, 1 teaspoon of thyme, 1 teaspoon of paprika, 2 teaspoons of sea salt, and you'll probably need to adjust using less the amount of salt if you're using regular table salt, and 1 teaspoon of cracked pepper. Begin by skinning the chicken. I've been skinning chicken since I was about 12 years old, and while I used to think it was against all child labor laws, I now think it's a pretty handy skill to have. You just have to hook behind the thigh and pull the skin from along the backbone. Then get a good hold of the skin and pull toward and then off the drumstick. Sometimes there's an extra chunk of fat here, and you want to be sure you remove that to make the chicken as lean as possible, especially since that's the goal here. Sometimes the skin will tear before getting it completely off the leg, but since that's a part not usually eaten, don't worry too much about it. Now you can bake the quarters whole, but I prefer them broken down to really get the feeling that I'm eating something more commercial and well fried. Cut along the joint and then flex the joint until you hear it pop, so that it becomes more obvious where to cut all the way through. Add the egg to the 1/4 cup of milk and then the olive oil. I would say you should end up with just about 3/4 cups of volume depending on the size of your egg. Give it a quick whisk, however it will partially separate and you'll need to give it another whisk later. Add 1 cup of flour to a large dish with a lid. A large zip top bag also works. This is what the chicken is going to be shaken up in. Add the thyme, the oregano, the paprika, the cayenne pepper, the garlic powder, the sea salt, and the pepper. Make sure your egg mix is in a container wide and shallow enough to dip the chicken. Dust a separate plate with about 1/2 cup of flour to first dress the chicken in before dipping it in the egg mix in order to help the outer crust stick. Prep a pan with a bit of depth so the chicken has someplace to drip while it's cooking. Also line it with foil to make cleanup a bit easier. You'll also need a grate to lay over the pan so your chicken isn't directly against the pan and has some room to breathe and get crisp. I put some olive oil in my hand and coat the grate to prevent the chicken from sticking. You can also use cooking spray, but be sure to coat both sides. Begin with the drumsticks. I do them 2 at a time by first dredging them in the flour, dipping them in the egg mix, and then moving them over to the seasoned flour. If you can manage, try to keep one hand dry and use the other for dipping in the egg mix. I had to keep one hand clean to operate the camera, but I usually forget at some point along the way anyway. Once you lay the chicken in place on the grate, try not to move because it tends to lift the oil from the grate and the chicken will be more prone to sticking. You'll need to dredge, egg, and then shake the chicken thighs individually so the liquid egg mixture won't make the seasoned flour clump up. Lay the chicken thighs with the smooth side up so that when it comes time to flip it, you have a presentable side for serving. Finish coating the pieces of chicken. If you're using a whole chicken, coat the drumsticks and the wings first, and again coat the thighs as well as the breast one at a time. Put the pan in a 375-degree oven on a mid-level rack. After a half hour, remove the chicken from the oven and flip each piece using a fork, like a lever between the grates, just in case the chicken pieces still try to stick. Quite a bit of fat, whether it be the olive oil or the natural fat from the chicken, collects in the bottom of the pan, which is something that maybe years down the road will be something that was thankfully avoided. I'm going to think that every little bit helps. The chicken is not going to be the most beautiful thing when you first flip it, but place it back in the oven for another half hour or so, and it will all crisp up. You can test if the chicken is done by attempting to remove the grizzle from the narrow end of a drumstick. If it's not quite there yet, just give it a few more minutes. And usually if I don't need the oven, I turn it off and let the chicken rest there until I'm ready to serve it. I will say that the chicken will be much more tender than that out of a fryer, and it's not the same, but after a while you won't miss the skin and you'll look forward to chicken night, especially if it satisfies a craving. I'm guilty of even going a few steps further by making broccoli slaw or even biscuits to go along with it. I guess it just depends on what your family is used to eating with their fried chicken. Let me know if you give it a try.